Shall we?
Yeah, while we're, I think if Dr. Coplan is late, we can get Professor Lee to start first while I'm trying to communicate with him. No.
Okay, thank you. So, shall we start now?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, let's let Professor Liu Yawei give some introduction remarks, then we will get the panelist. Okay, Dr. Coplan is online now.
Oh, great. Hi there.
Hey, Dr. Coplan, can you hear us all right?
I could hear you before, but I was connected to the wrong setting. So I've been on for the last half hour.
Oh.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
I think you're at the attendee list. That's what. But in any case, we're all here. So this is Yawei Liu. I'm the senior advisor for China at the Carter Center. It's our honor and privilege today to co-organize this webinar with the Untitled Institute based in Guangzhou, China. So the subject for today's webinar is the status of people-to-people relationship between the U.S. and China. And we want our esteemed panelists to look at the issue on whether the people-to-people exchange can stop the dangerous decline of the bilateral relationship. So the bios of our speakers will be posted to the chat so that we are going to save time by not introducing them. We want them to directly start their initial remarks. And so before we begin, I'm going to ask Professor Dingding Chen to say a few words.
Thank you, Yawei. Good morning for those who are in China, and good evening for those who are in the US. And it's a great pleasure to be here together with the Carter Center, led by China Center, led by Professor Liu Yawei. And we are certainly hopeful that with this webinar discussion, we can make some contributions to the current people-to-people exchanges in the bilateral relationship. As everybody is well aware of, our current bilateral relationship is undergoing some sort of fundamental challenges, which are not necessarily a negative thing in a way, but it is important, in my view, and also I think Professor Liu shares this view, that we institutions like universities and non-state actors should work together by making more efforts to promote people-to-people exchanges. I think a webinar like this is very much timely and necessary. And of course, we have a lot of wonderful support from other panelists, including distinguished scholars from the US and China. And I don't think I need to spend more time introducing them. And I think without further ado, we'll jump right into the first panelist, Professor Jeffrey Coplan from Emory University. And he's a distinguished health expert. And I will let Professor Coplan speak about 10 minutes first. And then we have the second speaker from Wuhan University, China. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chen, and thank you, Carter Center, for including me in this distinguished panel on a very important topic. I'd also like to thank, special thanks and good wishes and good health to President Carter, who has fostered and encouraged this relationship for many years since he was president. The relationship in the health sector between China and the US is an old one, beginning in 1835 with a doctor named Peter Parker who came to Hunan province and set up a Western-style hospital there. And that hospital has grown over the years to, the last time I saw it was 5,000 beds in Hunan. The South China Medical Center is there in Changsha. hospital. So the relationships go back a long ways. They were fostered and encouraged further through the late 19th century, early 20th century, and included that relationship with South Central Hospital growing even more under the influence of a Dr. Edward Hume, who's written of his experiences there. And with a contemporary outlook, we could say, well, these were colonialist excursions. And they had colonialist elements, but they also had a warmth, an understanding of each other, a respect for the give and take in health that encouraged collaboration. And it was an early form of exchange. That has flourished to this day, as you can see in the relationships, that one, but also between John Grant and C.C. Chen in forming Jingshan, south of Beijing, a study site for the students at Peking Union Medical College. Peking Union Medical College is about to celebrate its Medical College Hospital is about to celebrate its 100th birthday this coming year. Again, with ongoing relationships between scholars from both countries. I have the good fortune to be a member of the China Medical Board, which started in 1914, had close ties to PUMC, Shehe, and also many other institutions throughout China, and is now going on to its 103rd year of operation. And so that is to say that these linkages, the partnerships, the desire to get to know one another and learn from each other is not a new phenomenon. It's been going on for some time, and it's flourished in some periods and it's languished in other periods. The richness of give and take that was seen in the early 20th century in the Jing County work, if that model was put into place today in the U.S. or China or any other country, it would be seen as an innovative, contemporary, thinking outside the box of how to accomplish something. Because students were taken out of their classrooms, out of their dormitories in Beijing, and brought to a rural county site, and with expert mentorship from teachers on site, the students learned how to interrelate with the community, began to understand the relationship of community and populations to illness and good health, and trained cohort after cohort of students. And what I would say is a very contemporary and very courageous form of education, which we could learn from even today. From 1980 on, there was a time of rekindling of that relationship after decades of World War II, political stresses between the two countries. After the Nixon détente of 1972, and then President Carter's encouraging exchanges from 1980 on, this idea of linkage through exchanges and collaboration took hold. And during the period of the last close to 40 years, it's flourished. And it flourished in many different ways. To begin with, links were established between governmental institutions, from the U.S. National Institutes of Health, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and then from the China side, major institutions such as Fudan University, other universities, and various government institutes in Beijing. And over the next several years, there was a constant evolution and growth in the public health sector of institutions in China, with partnerships with U.S. institutions, among other places. That led to universities forming bonds to each other. It led to government agencies, particularly CDC US and the antecedent agencies to China CDC, Chinese Academy of Preventive Medicine, National Center for Preventive Medicine. Those evolved into what has become the China CDC. And the relationship between Atlanta-based U.S. CDC and Beijing-based China CDC has been a warm, collegial, productive one for both sides for these years since it was established in 2005. But in addition, NGOs have joined in and formed partnerships and contributions. On the U.S. side, the Gates Foundation has become more involved. China Medical Board has continued to be involved. On the China side, the think tank for health research, headed up by Professor Wang Qian, former director of the Chinese Academy of Preventive Medicine, has flourished. And collaborations between these institutions have flourished. And with it, substantive advances in public health, including studies on neural tube defects that have affected health around the world from that collaboration of American and Chinese scientists and looking at population-based introduction of folic acid to the diet and showing what a difference it can make in preventing neural tube defects. In addition, anti-tobacco programs have been established through partnerships to the benefit of both countries. And then the development and creation of the China CDC with active input, but with modifications appropriate to China. TB control programs, working together to combat Ebola virus in West Africa. Chinese scientists and strengths working with American scientists and strengths together to help stop that outbreak. And then the development of the African CDC, which to this day has heavy input from China and heavy input from American public health people working together with African colleagues to develop a strong agency as part of the African Union. These exchanges have been extensive. They involve senior scientists, they involve fledgling scientists, and they involve students early in their careers. In the past 5 years, 6 years, it's estimated that over 350,000 students from China have studied in the U.S. And these exchanges and these collaborations are what cement us together over time to work on future problems when we've worked together side by side as students and as trainees. And those future problems are increasingly the problems faced by Chinese population and the Chinese healthcare system are very much the same ones in the US. They include the structure of the healthcare system, the access to doctors, the training of doctors, professionalism of doctors, the role of nurses. All these are important in both our countries. And the health issues have increasingly, instead of being separate and different one to another, have become very much the same. An aging population with huge ramifications for both medical care, but also social issues, and growing old in a respected and in a helpful way, rather than in difficult circumstances for people. Urbanization, the mega cities in China and the growth of cities in other parts of the world, including the US. Environmental degradation, climate change, energy needs and how they'll be met, mental health issues, non-communicable diseases from heart disease, cancer, diabetes. In my first visits to China, we would go to a hospital ward and you would see no one with diabetes. And today, if we go through a hospital ward, we will see roughly 9% of the population with diabetes, much like in the US. So our issues become closer and closer together that we have to confront. I think this discussion today will revolve, I hope, around ways to restore the partnership and collaboration in health issues that I think has been challenged and not supported well the last 4 years. I think we have an opportunity to rekindle our friendship and our working together and not have it interfered with by those who don't understand or appreciate the advantage of our solving problems together rather than arguing with each other about things. There's an old Chinese proverb statement which I think plays well to this, which is, the way is one, the wind blows together. And that's the status we're in. We've got a common goal, where the wind's going in that direction. So let me hand it off to my colleagues and continue this theme and discussion of steps we will be taking to reinvigorate the U.S. China relationship around health, public health, and medical issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Coplan, for a wonderful introduction and a wonderful review of the cooperation between the two countries in the health area. And certainly we look forward to more cooperation in the future, particularly at this critical time of COVID or post-COVID, hopefully very soon. Next, we have Professor Li Hao from Wuhan University to talk about the potential cooperation between the two countries in the health area. Please welcome Professor Li Hao.
Thank you, Professor Chen. I also would like to thank organizers, Intelligent Culture Center, for inviting me to join this discussion. Currently, the people-to-people changes have dramatically dropped because of the deterioration of the bilateral relationship. As professors in the university, we are all not happy about this, and I want to do something about it. On the other side, the background is not optimistic at this moment. So let's look back now. Jeffrey just have a very good review of U.S. China collaboration in health. I would like to talk more about our collaboration, focusing on the university level. I'm a faculty, and in general, Chinese faculties have benefited a lot from capacity building between U.S.-China collaborations. Many of the universities in the United States, such as the Harvard and also the University of Washington, etc., they have helped China to develop a global health discipline in China, and also public health and health system, etc., in many aspects. In this aspect, we really have learned a lot from China. However, currently, there are a lot of challenges. First, that currently the Confucius Institute has been closed in the United States, and it is a sign that a window bridging each other is closed. And also, currently there are a lot of fake news in the internet, and many of the news are easily misleading to people who really do not know about China. We can also see this from another aspect, that currently Chinese people in general know more about the United States. The United States know more about China because currently much more Chinese students study in the United States than those Americans study in China. But there are also some American students, after they come to China, they know more about China. They are, and they can compare to different systems, and they will see that, oh, in China's system, there are also many good sides that maybe the United States can learn from. However, if they start to introduce real China, especially those things that may be better about China, they cannot be accepted by many of the local Americans. So this is another challenge as well. All this indicates that the importance of people-to-people exchange between U.S. and China, and not just Chinese students studying in the United States, but also the United States should send more students to study in China. The COVID-19 situation has further deteriorated the bilateral relationship. So at the university level, on the one side, we would like to exchange ideas. On the other side, we try not to touch the sensitive nerves of each other. And so this is a very complex mood for us. However, we are doing our best to promote collaborations. So we can say that many of the Chinese professors, together with the alumni, they are organizing sessions and forums to introduce China's experience to fight coronavirus. In the future, I think that the university level collaboration should be further strengthened. This is good to the mutual interest of both two countries. For the United States, the global public health security is very important, and for China, we also need to learn from the United States as well. So I suggest that in the future, the American universities and Chinese universities can collaborate more on programs about public health security, and also we can share our network in the developing countries. Actually, in the past, the two countries have done very good collaborations. For example, both countries are collaborating in the African CDC. But if we can supervise students there and implement cooperative projects together, both our students can learn more from each other. Also, from another sense, the current response to coronavirus, if China and the United States collaborate more, I think the vaccines can be accessible more widely, and also the process of developing more effective drugs will be faster. However, we haven't seen this in the current situation. This is very sad for us. We all know that the Chinese traditional medicine has its advantages. The Western medicine has its advantages as well. And in China, we have tried to integrate the traditional medicine with the Chinese with the Western medicine. I think there is hope for both countries to learn each other, to strengthen and improve our own system instead of fighting each other. So let's think about if for the Americans, you can eat the Chinese food, can watch Chinese kung fu movies. I think there will be they will lose a lot of fun, right? and for Chinese, it's the same. We have learned a lot from the United States. So about coronavirus, we think that it's like an alien invasion. So the most important thing is how all of us can work together to fight about the alien invasion instead of pointing each other. This is really not good. So in the future, we think we shall strengthen more collaboration, starting from the people-to-people exchange. But on the other side, this is not enough. So we really have to discuss how to do this from the all the stakeholder perspective. So it's not just people-to-people exchange. We have to talk about the participation of NGOs, etc., and think tanks as well. So we shall work all together to contribute the China-U.S. collaboration, and this will be good for the whole world. Yeah, this is my what I think at this moment. I think we can have more discussion in the later stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Li Hao, for providing some insights on how universities and the research institutions can work together. I think in the health area, it's more than more important than ever to cooperate. We can maybe, as an expert, we can start by recognizing each other's vaccines. So in the future, we could travel, to each other more freely. Anyway, next we're going to have Jeremy Horsley, who is a senior fellow at the Paul Tsai China Center at the Yale Law School. She's a renowned expert on people-to-people exchange issues. Please, Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Professor Chen and Dr. Liu, for including me in this conversation today. I was thinking, getting ready, that I've been affiliated with 5 U.S. China related NGOs. The very first was the Carter Center. I met Dr. Liu, and he invited me to take part in their wonderful village election project. And that was my first chance to work in such an environment going to China. I'd been working as a lawyer, but that got me out into the villages to meet with people. And my experience watching village democracy, transparency projects, participatory decision-making, then gave me a basis on which some of my work later on through the Yale Law School, working on developing China's Freedom of Information statute with transparency, government information disclosure, mechanisms to participate in lawmaking, things that we do in the US, but a lot of Americans have no idea this also happens in China. And I think back to the days of the village election project, where I first saw this developing from the grassroots in China as well. The NGO I work with now is both the Yale University, so also I'm in a university context, and then the law school itself. We've got a China Center. And I always think of it as sort of an NGO itself too, because our mission is to help through sustained cooperative projects with Chinese counterparts to assist with China's legal reform, to also work on bettering U.S.-China relations, and to help the American people better understand what is happening in China on the ground. And I think that's one area where NGOs can really be helpful, is below the level of the elite politics, where you have various tensions and considerations. NGOs can be the foundation for the relationship that continues, that builds ongoing, sustained relationships, working together on technical issues, on all kinds of the medical ones, but legal issues, social issues, building friendships, making connections, building bridges that sustain yourself through these times of great tension and challenge like the COVID. I was thinking, listening to Li Hao, I'm also affiliated with the Yale China Association, which sends Yale students to China to teach English for 2 years, embedded in villages there. It's a transformative experience for them, and also helpful for the Chinese that they interact with and are learning from, and creates relationships that continue for a lifetime. But Yale China also has a medical program. They helped found the Xiangya Hospital, also in Changsha, and a medical school. And I was struck because through Yale China, during the COVID experience, we put together the doctors and nurses from Xiangya Hospital who had gone to Wuhan. 50 of them went at the height of the outbreak. and worked there for 3 or 4 months. And they lost not a single healthcare worker. No one got ill or died. And of course, the Yale New Haven doctors and nurses in the hospital, affiliated with Yale, were really interested in this and wanted to know and learn from them what their techniques were and what they did. And it was just a very heartwarming thing to watch them getting so excited and exchanging stories and techniques and asking questions, and just epitomizes to me, the practical value, the human value of these connections that we make. I also think our center at Yale is a good example of how NGOs can help fill in times when the government relationship is not so good. It was founded by Professor Paul Gewirtz, who teaches constitutional law at Yale. And he was invited by Bill Clinton into the Clinton administration to run a global rule of law program. And it sent him to China for the first time ever. And he became just fascinated with what was happening in China and the legal professionals he met there, and decided he would work on a rule of law cooperative project between the US and Chinese governments. And sure enough, he got Bill Clinton to sign an agreement with Jiang Zemin at one point on a rule of law initiative with a whole series of projects they developed with judges and law professors, et cetera. But the US Congress did not want to fund that program for various reasons. And so Paul went back to Yale and got permission to set up our center to try and start carrying out these cooperative projects. And the way we work is to listen to Chinese counterparts and find out what they want to do. What are their challenges? What do they think they can learn from US experience about? So we're not imposing our agenda on the Chinese partners. And through a whole variety of projects in criminal law, in developing, gender discrimination issues, my area of government transparency and accountability, working closely with judges, with government officials, with academics, lawyers, and Chinese NGOs for 20 years now. We've built a whole range of relationships, both personal, professional, and also institutional. And we think that we've been able to establish a basis of trust on which to continue and build new relationships, which enabled us to maintain, pretty effectively during COVID, a lot of the projects and cooperation that we had going on. I mean, for me personally, it's been rewarding too, because just as Dr. Coplan was saying, you realize working with your Chinese counterparts that we do face the same challenges. We have the same desires, the same goals. We may express them differently and organize ourselves differently, but working on the NGO level on concrete problems and issues, you realize the great commonalities between us that should help unite us and not divide us so much. And I think that really is one of the strengths of the whole NGO experience and contribution during this. The U.S. China relationship, Li Hao was talking about some of the challenges in the US, which is true. I call it the China Caricature that has become the mantra, at least among many people in the government and the Congress and certain parts of American society, where they've come to see China as a monolith, totalitarian government, with only one goal. And every organization, whether it's Confucius Institutes or other Chinese think tanks, Chinese companies, they see all as arms of the Chinese Communist Party. We're there to, promote their goals. And instead of seeing the people behind them and the common issues that they want to deal with. On the American side, of course, we're facing issues in China as well. And a lot of people have talked about it, but one issue is the Foreign Ngo Law, which was adopted a few years ago. I think most NGOs operating in China were happy to be regulated and find a legal basis on which to be operating there. But unfortunately, at the time it was adopted, it severely restricted the ability of American NGOs to actually have offices, to have presences in China, and to carry out a variety of projects. And that has remained not even just a practical obstacle, but a perception of the NGOs not being wanted there. And I think on a strategic level, it was a mistake in that American NGOs are a pretty strong constituency, and we were very favorable constituency for China because operating in many different areas on many different issues. And the fact that the foreign NGOs were put under the purview of the Ministry of Public Security rather than under the civil affairs ministries like domestic NGOs are, sort of sent a message that we were all seen as potential threats, national security threats or public security threats, rather than partners and cooperators instead. Being a university, we were fortunate to be included in sort of an exception to the normal rules for university programs. And indeed, we were able to maintain a colleague at Peking University Law School and maintain a lot of the on-the-ground kind of connections that help enable our work to take place. But many other NGOs had to finally close offices, which is too bad because they lose those personal connections and understandings that you build by being in the ground. As Professor Li Hao said, it's very important that we get more Americans into China to personally experience how wonderful the people are and how exciting it is to be there. So I think that is one issue on the Chinese side that we need to deal with and think of ways in which maybe there would be steps to ease, some of the restrictions or the requirements on NGOs going in, to send out the welcome mat. Right now, the Chinese government is trying to make very clear that American companies are welcome in China, to sustain investments, to come in and do new things. And it'd be great if we could get the same message put out to American NGOs of a whole variety beyond just the universities, although of course, keep the universities in there as well. On the US side, we have a lot of work to do too, and we are trying to work on that as well, is to overcome what I say this characterizes this caricature of China and start developing new narratives to speak about China, new ways to think about it, try to get across the complexity and the diversity of the China experience as well. And certainly some of the issues would be to roll back and to reinstitute the Fulbright programs of exchanges, to, I think, stop beating up on the Confucius Institutes as well. I think they've been a valuable way to help teach a lot of Americans about Chinese culture. And I think there's still a lot of interest among American people in China and in Chinese culture and Chinese people. And I think we need to tap back into that and get more Americans over into China as well. So we have a lot of work to do on the US side as well. But I think that given the number, the other NGOs I've been involved with too, then were the National Committee for U.S. China Relations. I take part in a human rights and rule of law dialogue with them, and they've got many programs going on in China as well. And then also with the Brookings Institute, a think tank, which unfortunately is, again, one of the not preferred NGOs in China at the moment. And yet American think tanks, including Brookings, have been an incredibly important bridge during this period too, by conducting research and holding dialogues and then having public events and getting out information about the reality of China and the U.S. China, how important the U.S. China relationship is. So I think we have a lot of issues to talk to going forward too. But thank you for inviting me here. I feel very passionate about how important it is that we all work together on sustaining and improving the U.S.-China relationship. And I do think the role of NGOs is critical to that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jamie, for providing a very rich history of what your center and the past experience have done for the relationship. And I think it's our pleasure to welcome our next speaker, who is Miao Lü, co-founder of the #1 social think tank in China, CCG, Center for China and Globalization. And she's also a well-known young leader in China, a female leader in China think tank circles. So let's welcome Ms. Miao Lü to give her remarks. Please.
Thank you, Professor Chen Dingding, and the great invitation from Carter Center, Professor Liu. I'm so pleased to be here. And actually, I'm so glad to see so many friends from the U.S. and China. I think the most important issue right now between U.S. and China is deepening trust. It's very important to manage conflicts and find a way to coexist peacefully and seek common ground despite we have differences. However, I find the people-to-people exchanges between two countries have been hampered during Trump administration, even after in the pandemic as well, with the measures such as visa tightening and the expulsion of journalists from two countries, causing the cultural decoupling between U.S. and China. The trust deficit between the two countries is more prominent than any time. We know just now some colleagues mentioned the universities and the students between study in different in the two countries. Actually, of course, there's indeed there is a big deficit between two countries. I mean, like there are about 370,000 Chinese students enrolled in American colleges and universities before pandemic in 2019, where only about 10,000 Americans travel to China each year for study. So this reflects a gap between US and China and American students in understanding Chinese counterpart. And it is grateful that the number of overseas students from the US coming to China has decreased during Trump's administration. The US dropped to the fourth largest country of origin for students coming to China to study in 2017 and the fifth place in 2018. Of course, Trump's administration's harsh immigration policies also leads to the drop of growth rate for Chinese students studying the US. Both sets of data illustrate that US-China education exchanges are going downhill in recent years. Less students exchange means less exposure and familiarity to the other's culture and society. Another issue that I find the deficit of understanding between US and China youth is emerging. In the intensified competition between two countries has profound implications on world order and mutual understanding. The eyes of young Chinese, some people say so-called the nationalist sentiments, are also by the US poor and kind of attitude towards China. And of course, our counterpart is similar situation. As the young people between US and China have an increasingly limited understanding of each other, communication and exchange of many kinds is of vital significance. More dialogue mechanisms need to be built to restructure our relationship and boost mutual understanding. I hope in the future, students and tourists are more important links to deepen the ties between our country. Normal activities and the tourists and the international students should be ensured, and the negative publicity and the restructuring could be reduced. Of course, the media exchange programs could be promoted by both sides. Media is a very important bridge for our mutual understanding. And another way is that I would like to suggest that in this occasion, we can do something to invite the assistance of the US congressmen could also be invited to visit China, to understand China. I find that those groups, the assistance of those senators, congressmen, are very important, crucial for the core value of the Congress and impact those very important policymakers. Secondly, I was wondering maybe the scholar exchange program should be resumed, such as the Fulbright scholarship. We know that every year there are hundreds, there used to be hundreds scholars between US and China did a great job to communicate and understand each other through the scholarship. Of course, recently the new U.S. China Scholars Program, CUSP, in March has funded by 5 private American foundations. has opened, but there still need more of those similar scholarship. And by the way, I would like to mention the think tanks exchange are very crucial as well. Like today's event, Carter Center and the Chinese think tankers and from different sectors to communicate through the webinar, the virtual meeting, to communicate with each other, exchange the insights. Those events are very, very important to boost our understanding between each other. From CCG's perspective, Professor Chen mentioned, the CCG is a leading think tank. We are a non-governmental one. We have organized a lot of events between US and China, especially after pandemic. We had more than 70 events, the webinar events happening, and they are most of them are English ones. And our practice is that we would like to make most of our events public through the live style to promote our values and our exchanges in open and public. So there are more than 1 million audiences every time to watch our webinars. It's quite important to the second track dialogue. It's quite important to promote our mutual understanding. And another factor is that I think the Chamber of Commerce and those MNCs in China are very important. We considering the second track dialogue, we should engage more factors, including, like I mentioned above, those factors, the enterprises and the Chamber of Commerce, those are the bonds between US and China. I think in addition, the track 2 diplomacy mechanism between US and China think tanks could be advocated. And we know under Bush and Obama's administration, there was the strategic economic dialogues between US and China. The official strategic economic dialogue has been suspended since Trump took office, but Chinese non-government think tank represented by CCG and a lot of our other similar organizations still remain close communication and contacts with the U.S. think tanks, Chamber of Commerce. We established exchange cooperation mechanism with the leading think tanks in U.S. and the research institutions, including AEI and the Heritage Foundation and the CSIS. In the coming 2 weeks, we will have some events with those think tanks in U.S. as well. This year, CCG has initiated a serious dialogue between US and China, such as we had already had some 2-hour in-depth dialogues between CCG and Thomas Friedman, the very well-known writer. And of course, we had a dialogue with well-known professor, the Thucydides Trump, Graham Allison, the corner of Thucydides Trump. I remember exactly, he mentioned that U.S.-China relation is a kind of inseparable conjoined twins. One die, another have to die. So that is very classic comparison. CCG also have conversation. We will have in the coming 2 weeks. We have Joseph Nye and Harry Paulson to conduct the bilateral 2-hour discussion. I think the 2-hour discussion with one very well-known think tanker from U.S. counterpart is very important. We can have the deep and insightful discussion. We also has held NGO roundtables. We think the American NGOs in China are quite critical at this important moment, such as the Ford Foundation and the Asia Foundation. Those two foundations, we had some NGO roundtable in the past few months. Also, we would like to make those NGO and think tank exchanges should be kind of institutionalized. The U.S. China NGO and think tank cooperation is essential in climate change sustainable development, pandemic, and the infrastructure construction, of course, including the energy needs. We have the other colleague mentioned, where there is already consensus and could facilitate more consensus at the atmosphere. I believe that in the past few years, especially during the Trump administration, the atmosphere between U.S. and China has been damaged. We should resume it and recover it while the think tanks, while the NGOs, the scientists, the artists, and a lot of our sectors to rebuild it. And yeah, additionally, I would like to mention, as my kids in the international school, I find the K-12 education, the international one, is very crucial as well. There are a lot of, at least hundreds, the international school in China. Most of them are the American background. Their textbook are American textbook, and those people know U.S. very well from the educational exchanges. I think we should leverage those kind of power and those kind of group people to boost understanding as well. And of course, including the JV, the joint venture campus, like the NYU Shanghai, Kunshan Duke, and a lot of those JV universities in China, they can play a very significant role in the future between our bilateral relationship to recover our normal one or normal relation. Like Professor Ding mentioned, CCG have initiated the Global Young Leaders Dialogue, GYLD program in recent few months. We find that the mutual understanding from the youth is very important. We created a unique communication, education, and professional development platform for young achievers under the age of 45 with a diverse regional culture and professional backgrounds across the globe. We have some understanding China tours. We have kicked off one last week, and we finished the 5 days Guizhou province tour to understand China and to experience the true Chinese life and true China's development. And from my perspective, I find the Chinese culture is kind of culture with the experience, the rich culture. It's not a kind of with advantage on the logical evaluation. So understanding China should experience China's life and spend some time in China deeply. I think that is better to understand China. So we initiated the GYLD Global Young Leaders Dialogue. We focus on dialogue. We make some the China tours and make some wise demo to understand each other. So on this occasion, I would like to promote our GYLD program is happening. We invite people from our American counterparts to join this one. Last week, we have invited a dozen young leaders right now in China from overseas, from different countries, including 2 American. They enjoy it very much. In the coming weeks, we will go into Guangdong. We will visit Professor Chen, and we are going to Sichuan province as well. So we would like to invite more people to join it. Finally, I would like to mention that maybe between our relationship, we can engage the other factors, third countries, such as Singapore or European countries. CCG is trying the best to do something through the trilateral dialogue, such as in the coming, next week, we have trilateral dialogue. We collaborate with the German NGO Coplan Foundation and the Pew Research Center from US. We had a trilateral exchange, the next bond in US and China relations. And in the coming week, end of this month, we will have another trilateral exchange among China, Singapore, and US to do something together, to co-host it. I think the third country could play more and more significant role to moderate and do something between U.S. and China relations. So we try our best to engage more factors to boost our mutual understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Miaoli, for making very concrete proposals as to how to improve our relationship. I think those are wonderful suggestions. I look forward to future interactions. Now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Liao Wei to moderate the second half of the discussion. Dr. Liao Wei, please.
Our next speaker is Maria Rapnikova. She actually teaches at our neighbor, the Carter Center neighbor, Georgia State University. But this semester, she's a Wilson Center scholar, and she's speaking to us from Washington, D.C. Maria?
Good evening, good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great. So it's a real honor to be part of this very important exchange, and someone who is also very passionate about people-to-people exchanges and relations between China and the US. It's a great privilege to be able to speak about the issue of the media, but also more broadly about people-to-people relations. I think I especially enjoyed the comments just presented by Miao, and it seems that in some ways maybe our work is not as challenging as it may seem, because some of the programs have been already kind of set up for many years and quite successful. And what we need to do is kind of restart them or maybe expand them. For instance, the National Committee on U.S. China Relations, where I have been a China Public Intellectuals Fellow, has been doing congressional staffers programs to China for many years, with academics often accompanying staffers and kind of teaching them some things about China, but also the staffers meeting many different members of Chinese society and politics. So programs like this already exist. And of course, the Fulbright program, the fellowship, has been very successful, and I believe has restarted this year under different names supported by the Luz Foundation. But hopefully it's going to expand and kind of restart to its previous, old years when many fellows have been spending their time in China, including myself. For me personally, Fulbright was my first array into scholarship and research on China, where I spent a year in Harbin studying Chinese labor migration and China-Russia relations. The program that was unfortunately suspended gave me a first-hand experience of interacting with Chinese officials, students, and scholars who patiently listened to me and helped me formulate my questions, carry out field work on the border between China and Russia, and meet many different people throughout my stay. That year of long, heavy meals of flavorful dumplings and frisky weather inspired me to pursue my doctorate in politics with a focus on China. I certainly give Fulbright experience much credit in shaping my interest, but also in giving me the courage to do research in China, the courage to make mistakes, to ask for help, to unpack the many fascinating contradictions of the China story with the help of my Chinese colleagues and friends. My PhD research took me to the topic of Chinese media politics and the topic of Chinese media that is at the heart of the current tensions, but also the broader relations between China and the US. This topic I've now researched for over a decade, including domestic media party relations, as well as more recently, China's external communication and soft power. As part of this research, I got to know many Chinese journalists across media outlets, from national party outlets like Xinhua to many commercialized outlets like Caixin. It taught me that Chinese media, despite restrictions, is capable of producing some very impressive professional reporting. And we saw that especially during the pandemic in China, and that it is unhelpful to aggregate all Chinese media into an overarching label of a mouthpiece of the party. I also came across many talented Western journalists, especially American reporters, who did their best to report profoundly and objectively about China. Many of them committed their careers to China, learned the language fluently, and called China their home. Unfortunately, in recent years, media relations and bilateral perceptions about the media have exacerbated. First, as we know, bilateral media relations have shrunk and gotten worse with the designation of Chinese state media as foreign missions in 2020, limiting the number of Chinese journalists in the US to 100, and the expulsion of many leading American journalists from China. More recently, Chinese media activities globally have been also frequently described and labeled as sharp power, which is very similar to the designation of Confucius Institutes in the US and around the world. And American Western media is often treated with animosity and distrust by Chinese officials and wider public. This cycle of tit-for-tat retaliation and overall worsening of media environment has meant that there are now more narrow bilateral information flows, less information about each other's countries accessible to Chinese and American citizens. It also means that there is a higher tendency to trust rumors or provocations online, and this was already mentioned by previous speakers, disinformation, more nationalism, and more distrust. And of course, also more fake news. As a regular reader of China news from outlets like the New York Times and Washington Post, the shrinkage of coverage about China is noticeable. As an educator, it also makes it harder to teach about China and to assign research projects to students who often rely on credible media sources to carry out their own work and projects at the university. In other words, worsening media relations trickle down to all aspects of bilateral ties. They may seem purely symbolic, but they affect societal communication and even academic teaching. As such, it's imperative for Chinese and American negotiators and politicians to start addressing this issue. Completely resolving it, it seems to be impossible given the sensitivity of the issue. As much as we can hope for everything to come back to normal, so to speak, I don't think that's really feasible in the near future. The US government is unlikely to retract the foreign agent label from Chinese media, and Chinese government is unlikely to retract its expulsions of US outlets. But there are some things that can be done, some propositions that I want to put forward here. First of all, I think there's a possibility of granting some concessions or offerings on both sides. It could start with a number of journalists, allowed back into each other's countries. It could be a very small number, but that could be also a beginning, kind of an invitation again to restart the dialogue, similar to propositions about the NGOs made earlier. The second kind of approach could be launching a new joint fellowship program on co-reporting on China-US relations for Chinese and American reporters. This fellowship program could be co-joined with US and Chinese institutions, and fellows could report again together on Sino-US relations and on topics that perhaps are maybe less politicized, but very much significant, such as climate change, health collaboration, and green energy. We could emphasize less explosive issues in this coverage, something that could help gradually rebuild trust, something that many speakers have already brought up, like how society has adapted to coronavirus, surviving the pandemic, more societal and bottom-up, stories as opposed to only high political kind of stories that are very sensitive to cover. Daily life aspects as opposed to just politics. The fellowship could also focus on the business of journalism. Both countries are facing the same challenge of the dying out of traditional journalism industry, a significant digitalization of news, and traditional journalism becoming essentially online journalism. How the two countries deal with that is worth bilateral engagement. I think the two journalists, types of journalists and outlets themselves could learn a lot from this type of engagement. The third thing that I think could be very feasible is offering more scholarship and exchange opportunities to Chinese journalists here in the US, especially those doing professional reporting. That's very valuable. In my experience, interviewing many Chinese journalists, I found that they have spent extensive time in the US interning for American media, studying in the United States in journalism schools and other programs, and they've benefited quite a bit, made significant networks through these exchanges. Supporting the professional outlets like Caixin, Caixin, as well as citizen journalists with exchange opportunities is a productive step that I think has worked in the past that could be expanded. The fourth step could be engaging with Chinese student media as mediators in China-US relations. Some of them already started their own outlets that are quite popular amongst the overseas Chinese community. And I think the notion of nationalism amongst the youth and misunderstandings by the two communities of the youth in China and the US is very significant, but there are also increasing mediators. There are new platforms, new outlets that are emerging. They're not really fitting into the kind of space of traditional media, either in the US or China. These groups exist, and I think that could be a great space to also build outreach by both US and China. And lastly, and I think that's probably the hardest step, that's more about our thinking about the media on both sides. It requires kind of de-escalate our thinking about the media. With US media coverage of China can be critical, but it also presents a credible source of information, a more trusted source that can help shape China's global image. In other words, Western media is not inherently an enemy. That's a message that could be sent to China. And on the US side, Chinese media outlets are mostly driven by telling the China story rather than by engaging in coercive actions here in the US. Similarly to CIs, the mission of Chinese media, I think, is much more complex and multifaceted, and the many actors involved in this mission have also many different agendas. Many of them are far away from this kind of coercive mission that's often being described and underscored by the policy community in Washington. Again, Chinese media is not an enemy. Humanizing and de-escalating our understanding of bilateral media is the prime step forward that I think is important to work on for all of us as educators, as members of think tanks, NGOs, and other platforms in charge of rebuilding US-China relations. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I look forward to further discussion.
Thanks, Maria. My response to what you just said is, wow, there are so many good and constructive recommendations. I think CCG and Intelligence Institute and the Carter Center probably need to look at your proposals, and maybe some of them could be adopted, and we can launch these joint programs that you mentioned. Our next speaker is Professor Zai Zheng from Beihai, the Beijing Foreign Studies University. He also he was the last director of the Confucius Institute at the University of Hawaii, where I studied back in 1987. Maria was talking about U.S. institutions inviting Chinese journalists. I think East-West Center at the University of Hawaii used to invite reporters from China Daily, from Xinhua News Agency, to study for a year over there. I think that exposure to how U.S. Media outlet are run is very important, and we simply hope there'll be more. So Professor Zai, the floor is yours. I hope you'll also respond to some of the things that Maria has discussed in her remarks. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Liu Yawei. Indeed, a quick follow-up to the program that you mentioned. When I was there in Hawaii, the program to train the Chinese reporters were still operating, and that was before the COVID. I hope that the program would resume so that we can have more collaboration in the media area. And thank you very much, Maria, for proposing those very constructive suggestions. And I do believe that many of them could be turned into reality, including the collaborative programs between the university students majoring in journalism and communication between the two countries. I'm honored to be invited to this very timely webinar and join this very distinguished panel of speakers. It's so heartening to hear all the speeches about all the various collaborative programs between China and the US, and especially the personal connections in them. And as I said, the concrete suggestions raised by many of the previous speakers are also very constructive, illuminating, and I do hope that some of them, at least, could be turned into reality. I would like to take today's opportunity to share with you some of my personal stories and my understanding of people-to-people exchange between the two countries. As you can see from my bio, I'm both a beneficiary and a facilitator of people-to-people exchanges between China and the US. As a Fulbright foreign language teaching assistant grantee 16 years ago, I not only taught Chinese language and culture to American students, but also learned about America firsthand. My year of teaching in Helena, Montana, somewhere, I guess many of you haven't been there, and when I was talking to American friends, a few of them actually have visited Montana. It's in the middle of nowhere. But that experience actually was very interesting. And after my teaching ended, I spent a little over a month traveling over 20 states in continental US on Amtrak. And so this experience filled me with so many pleasant memories that when I returned to China, I created and offered a course on American culture and society, where I shared my understanding and anecdotes with hundreds of students in Beihai. 10 years ago, I was appointed the China director of Info USA at BFSU, an American cultural center partially sponsored by the US Embassy, Beijing. With very limited funding, we managed to organize public lectures about the US on a regular basis. Our speakers included Pulitzer Prize-winning reporters, renowned Asian American authors, and of course, Fulbright professors. We also offered a myriad of cultural programs, ranging from a banjo performance to a Broadway music show, from a master class in drama to Navajo Eagle dance brought by Native American performers. There were also frequent visits by US diplomats, both from the embassy and the State Department to the Beihai campus. Thanks to these exchange programs, BFSU or Beihai students could learn much more than books can teach them. And 3 years ago, I jumped at the opportunity to be the China director of the Confucius Institute at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Before our forced closure as a result of the 2019 John McCain National Defense Authorization Act, RCI had provided the local community with Chinese language instructions, teacher training, cultural programming, and China-bound study or research tours for 13 years. These programs did not compete with, but complement the well-established Chinese language program at the University of Hawaii. None of those programs interfered with the quote-unquote academic freedom of the university or became the subject of any allegation of misconduct whatsoever. When we announced the news of closure, our students and the K-12 Chinese teachers who benefited from our regular workshops flooded us with letters of regret, appreciation, and gratitude. For them, our departure would leave a gap that is hard to close, at least in the short run. As we all know, many U.S. government-funded academic exchange programs between the two countries, including the Fulbright program, of which I'm a proud alumnus, have been suspended. Most American cultural centers in China have also been in a dormant state, at least partly because of the withdrawal of funding. 2019, CI's Confucius Institutes at U.S. universities, being the scapegoat of political agendas, have been subjected to waves of closures. The suspension of such exchange programs has not resulted in better understanding. If anything, it has led to more misunderstanding. US level of anxiety about China are at historical highs. The Pew Research poll from July last year found 73% of American respondents have negative attitudes toward China, the highest percentage since Pew began collecting such data in 2005, when 35% reported negative attitudes toward China. At the same time, Chinese attitudes toward the US are souring as well. These recent trends in public sentiment, of course, run parallel to a dramatic deterioration in China-US relations as politicians play on popular fears and perceptions. When China has been labeled by many American politicians to be the primary competitor, rival, or in the words of top US intelligence officials, the so-called unparalleled priority among world threats, and when the US is perceived to be weak in containing the COVID-19 pandemic, saddled with gun violence and racial issues and putting up roadblocks preventing China from growing, the two peoples need more, not fewer, channels of communication so that they could vent their frustrations and hear each other out. There are, of course, obvious challenges confronting the US and China alike, arising from long-standing and deeply rooted skepticism toward each other. For one, the paranoia over alleged Chinese infiltration has turned American campuses the sites of ideological battles, with China-related programs as well as Chinese scholars and students subject to unwarranted scrutiny. For another, the news media in both countries have come under the crossfire, as Maria mentioned. So you have heightened hostility when journalists publish stories about each other. Finally, embittered and polarizing online debates across the social media have left few netizens convinced of the merits of the other. Sadly, we're witnessing a devastating trend in growing misunderstanding and mistrust among our two peoples. The row between the world's two top economies not only has implications for the two, but also a negative impact on the rest of the world. Naturally, we're under no illusion that individual efforts alone can fully repair the sour bilateral relations. Yet, even if our goal is not the immediate return to normalcy, we still need individuals in both countries who can acknowledge cultural differences and value conflicts, who can see why others may reasonably disagree. When I was a graduate student in the American Studies program at BFSU over 2 decades ago, one of the most memorable lessons I learned was that we should not be content with merely understanding the American institutions, which was challenging enough. Rather, we should try to find out why Americans are Americans, something much harder to do if we rely only on books. During times of difficulty, there is often a temptation to amplify the differences in values, beliefs, and behaviors among the Chinese and Americans. However, there is in fact more that unites us than divides us. We all want to enjoy the freedom from want and freedom from fear, and we're faced with the same global crises, be it global warming or the spread of pandemic. These areas of commonalities give rise to ample space for exchange and dialogue, where mutual understanding could be forged through bottom-up associations, networking, and people-to-people exchanges. Only by doing this can we be able to imagine ourselves in the other's shoes. Unlike diplomacy, people-to-people engagement is more subtle, personal, and down-to-earth, and may help achieve breakthroughs when formal channels are constrained. Exactly 50 years ago, the exchange of ping-pong players between the two countries marked the thaw in China-US relations and paved the way for the eventual establishment of the diplomatic relations between the two countries. Today, both governments should step up in restoring the fabric of people-to-people exchanges by, say, removing visa restrictions, depoliticizing language programs, and reinstating scholarship and exchange programs, to name just a few. I'm going to end my short speech today with an analogy. We tend to see the Great Wall of China as a military defense project separating peoples. However, one of the unintended consequences, or perhaps intended consequences, is that the Great Wall boosted economic and ethnic integration between the Han people from the south and the nomadic nations from the north. In times of peace, people on both sides of the wall exchanged goods with each other at certain trading posts. It also promoted cultural exchanges and regional integration. I think this is something we should learn from history. If wall building is unavoidable, some strategic trading posts must be kept intact so that we could still trade goods and ideas and understand the constraints and concerns of the other side. Now more than ever, we need to create more opportunities for mutual understanding. And that's the end of my presentation today, and thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to our discussion that would follow. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Professor Zhai. I think your last analogy about the wall is very important. I think President Carter, in his communications with the Chinese leaders and also to the meetings we organized, he repeatedly said, both sides are actually erecting walls of ignorance. And, it's the mission of us, if not the leaders of both countries, to destroy that wall of ignorance and rebuild the trust. So we'll see how this is going to evolve. Our last speaker, certainly not the least, is a legendary person, at least among Chinese Americans over here. I thought, I came to study in the US early, but before I came here, Dr. Zhao already got his PhD from University of Massachusetts, as early as 1986. So he was really a pioneer of Chinese students, coming here to the U.S. and who later was able to rise very high in American universities and other institutions, including the National Science Foundation. So his experience is thick, and he is leading universities in both U.S. and China. And what he's going to share with us certainly will shed light on where this relationship used to be, and where it is now, and where it is going to be in the future. So Professor Zhao, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Liu. Certainly now you're telling people I'm very old. Yes, I'm very old. You are right. I benefit personally from the people-to-people relationship between China and US. The real story was, after a relationship being restored, still both parties did not know each other at all. At that time, UMass International Study Program Director, her name is Barbara Brim. Actually, she was international advisor for President Carter, as far as I know. This lady went to China and aggressively seeking for Chinese students to study in UMass. I was one of the 6 students being recruited by her. Certainly, I benefit tremendously. I also think UMass also benefit by having students from China. Just an example, UMass may not be a top 10 or top 20 university in US at all. However, at this moment, that university graduated 2 presidents for Chinese universities simply because early engagement with Chinese universities. Having said that, certainly I agree, people-to-people relationship is critical. Another note I'd like to add on was people know Sino-US relations started by ping pong. That's the people-to-people relationship. Actually, many people did not know, but Ding Ding know. People in academic also started very early engagement and helped eventually restore the diplomatic relationship. The real evidence was, I work in University of Macau. The 3rd president of University of Macau was called Da Guang Lin. Okay, Lin Da Guang. Many of you probably never heard this name, but this is a great guy. We need to have found a time to talk about this guy. Nevertheless, he was a faculty member in University of McGill. And in the later 60s, or in 1970, he organized seminars for Chinese scholars, Canadian scholars, and American scholars, talk about relationship. As far as he can tell in his book, actually, eventually, the State Department officers attended his seminars, and they actually started meeting with Chinese officials there. This is way before so-called Warsaw meeting in Poland. Eventually, relations restored. So this is a story many of you did not know, but it's written in his book. I believe it. Now, all this is just try to say I agree with all of you. The relationship development is critical by continuously engaging people-to-people interaction. However, as you notice, I'm actually may or may not should belong to this seminar because my background is science engineering rather than international studies. So let me give you some my thought on the issue from my own science engineering background. Especially my background is computer science. Obviously, computer science, internet has benefited people globally in the last 4 or 5 decades. People normally do not link computers or internet with your diplomatic relationship or politics. But we all know many political issues, you always have economic reason behind it. Although my background is computer science, I should say many good words about computers. Certainly you all agree, computer very important, it help you improve life, etc., etc., etc. However, many of us did not realize so-called internet economy. People normally link that to globalization, right? Because internet, now people, for example, we can have this seminar, we can have a very cheap telephone call, and we can send an email, So normally people think the internet helped the globalization. But what we're observing is while internet is helping the globalization, but at the same time, globalization seems to be crashing. Okay, so this is a contradiction. Why? One of the reasons, my observation is, yes, internet help communication, provide you very cheap, reliable communication means. However, internet, for whatever reason, also resulting in an economy which is winner takes all. Okay, when the economy becomes winner takes all, then the society development become very odd. Just like last speaker just talked about, then it forced the wall, WAL, being built because people now want to be more defensive. Because winner takes all. If you don't build a wall, then the winner will take it. So I think for you guys in international study, while we're looking for this downgraded relationship we want to restore it, we really need to consider the context. The new economy, without any control, without any consensus, will be winner takes all. And what kind of culture, what kind of order, what kind of international regulation we should be promoting, so to help many people can win, not only one guy can win. Okay, I think that's critical. Otherwise, we will force people to go to this very bad reactions. Another thing about a computer. So certainly we know relationship is not good, and we see it's getting worse. Now, computer, I try to blame the computer because computer, internet creates a winner takes all economy, which is part of the reason make that happen. Another thing we need to realize is the risk now is very, very high because of a computer, okay? In older days, yes, we can have the war. And when we have the war, because people limited or the politicians constrained by people's life, okay? Any political leader, when they consider how many millions of people lost life, they think twice before they engage in the war. Unfortunately, again, blame my field, blame my profession. Computers, robotics, AI now have been developed into a stage. You now can have a physical war without losing a single human life, but certainly damage tremendously. This is a very high risk of human development. I think globally, everybody should be aware, and hopefully we can manage that. Finally, certainly this seminar, at least many of us, including myself, we're all looking for a recipe, okay? What's the solution? Tell us what we do as a people, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, all of us can act from our own way. But Professor Ding Chen and I worked in Macau for a while. My observation is that we may able to learn from Portuguese-Chinese relationship. You know, that relationship has had for 500 years. And there's certainly some unhappy time. There's certainly some debates, arguments, issues, etc., etc., etc. However, both through Macau has not resulted in so-called truly or seriously confrontational issues. And both sides were able to resolve many issues peacefully. And so far, as far as I can see, they're still engaging. Macau people happy. Certainly the Chinese government and the Portuguese government were happy. Ding, you probably know this better because you guys international studies. I do not know what's the particular strategies, methodologies behind it. But my very limited position is because bilateral relationship in many other pairs, I don't want to name them, normally engage with the terrible consequences. but the Chinese-Portuguese relationship, they do have issues, but apparently they are able to solve them smartly and peacefully. I hope we can learn from that as well. So let me end up here. I'd like to thank Professor Liu and all of you, and certainly I'm happy to learn from all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Zhao. Unfortunately, time is already up, but we do have a lot of questions from both Q&A and chat. And so Dingding and I certainly were not good moderators, but we decided that we're going to condense the questions to a couple and pose them to our esteemed panelists. And Dingding now will pose the question once. It's just one round, and after that, we'll just have to, close the webinar. We can keep talking here until tomorrow morning for sure, because this is such a consequential relationship, and the relationship in such a bad shape. And one question, I guess Dingding probably will ask is, there seems to be from the audience this very pessimistic view that when the two governments are so hostile to each other, can we make the difference? We're here, we're talking about people-to-people exchange. What can we do to make a difference? How can we convince the leaders of both countries, and particularly, maybe I'm biased here on the U.S., that this kind of zero-sum rivalry, is counterproductive to both peoples and to both countries and to the world. So Dingding, the floor is yours, and pose your question. Maybe one question to each of the speakers, and then let them make their answers short, and then we can successfully close our webinar. Go ahead.
Okay. I think it just shows that the quality of this webinar is very high. So a lot of people have a lot of questions. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to address all of them. I think I just combine all these questions to one sort of a big question to all six panelists here. Anybody can offer your opinions if you want. I think the big question is to echo Yawei's previous point. We know this is a difficult time for this bilateral relationship. We all know that. I think we all have offered wonderful concrete suggestions, and Mallory and Maria and Professor Zhao and so on, very concrete proposals. I like them all, but we still needed to give maybe more concrete proposals, ideas as to how to really improve this relationship. I think maybe for each panelist, maybe just one more, very small, that practical, that can be implemented proposal. I think that would be wonderful, and then we can get a list of workable proposals. So how to move forward, basically, from each of you. We can start with Professor Coplan. Or anybody else would like to?
Thinking, I was just listening. I think we're better off in health than many of the other areas presented here today. Than in health, and I think Jamie made the same observation, that there's something about health issues that are so universal and that capture people in a different way, that the economic differences, the tariff differences, the things that divide folks in this are not on the line usually in health discussions, whether it's with nurses or with surgeons or whoever. They immediately get together of, well, how did you do that? What made that better? Why did you have so few deaths? How could we do it in the same way? And these relationships built over the last 40 years don't dissolve because the leadership of the countries are having trouble. As long as the relationship of me and you on an important topic is going well, then we shut the rest out, and we're still close, we still have a friendship, and we still have a professional relationship. So I think that can be rekindled probably more easily in the health field than from some of the other areas mentioned.
I agree. Okay, maybe next. Li Hao, Professor Li Hao.
Yes, thank you. As I work in the university, and I would make the following recommendation. I suggested that both the two countries focus on the global health, education, and training. The priority areas can be health system strengthening, health global health security, and health emergency response. Both the universities in China and the United States can launch programs at all levels, undergraduate, graduate, and PhD level, and so provide scholarship opportunities to applicants. And then the two universities can co-supervise the students, and the students may have 2 degrees. And also based on these programs, students can do intern in our mutual platforms. For example, in Africa, the African CDC is an ideal a place to co-supervise students. And also based on that, we can conduct online training as well. So I think this is good to both of our two countries, and can help our Chinese students to develop their capacity, and in future can contribute more to global health security. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Jamie, please. One more from you.
Yeah, I wish I could answer the big question, which Yahweh raised too on, and people have asked, what can we do, NGOs do to influence our respective governments? And one idea I thought maybe with the journalists too, we could work to try and get media to report more on these kinds of collaborations and things that are going on, would be one idea. But on NGOs specifically, someone in chat was asking me, what would you do about in the China situation, the Foreign Ngo Law? Of course, I'm thinking, what about the US too? And I came up with some suggestions. I think it's unlikely the law will be revised to remove the public security authorities from their monitoring thing, but it would also be good. Right now, foreigners now have to go find a Chinese sponsor organization before they go register with the public security. And a lot of organizations are unwilling to take the responsibility, to be the kind of minder or whatever for a foreign NGO. That requirement used to apply to domestic NGOs too, but has largely been lifted now for most of them. And so if that requirement could be eased, and as I said, the political message would go out that China does welcome NGOs to come back, visas will be issued, et cetera, that would be great. It would send a positive message to the US, that China is not looking at US NGOs as being subversive. But in response, the US has to agree to do the same thing with China, because we've now become exactly the same way and see all Chinese, organizations, including the Confucius Institutes, as subversive or potentially subversive organizations. And so we need both governments on both sides to show political will and welcoming of each other's organizations and NGOs to come in here and be free to be able to interact with people and not be accused of all these nefarious acts. So that's my hope, that somehow both sides could make
Thank you.
agreements on that.
Thank you. Ms. Miaolui?
Well, we move to Maria.
Maria, please.
Well, I guess my last takeaway is that I don't think we should wait for the political kind of forces to soften or to move forward. I don't see any hope in, for example, political sides, when it comes to the media, to really become more open to one another. So I think we should not wait for that. Instead, just try to find more depoliticized spaces to engage journalists in these exchanges. I think that the sector of health or health reporting is very, very powerful in doing that. But I think also universities can help to link up different journalists from China and the US to meet and to discuss, to co-report, to share their best business and reporting practices. And I think that's something that's very feasible. It's not as politicized. It doesn't have the same kind of affiliations or labels as Confucius Institutes or as state media or as Western media in China. So I think we need to find new spaces and that are more kind of accessible, but still, you know, powerful. That's my takeaway. I think waiting for political sides to move for this kind of ice to break will take too long. So that's my final word. Thank you.
Jiazhen, please.
Okay, I quite agree with Maria. I don't think we can wait for the governments to become closer again, and I don't think that could be seen in the immediate future. But to respond to some of the comments raised by people attending this webinar in the chat box, I noticed that people are wondering what we can do. I think from a perspective of a professor of English, the language, I'm proposing something that each individual in the world can do, that is to pick up a foreign language. Because if you can pick up a new language other than your native language, you will not only see the world from a new perspective, you would also be more tolerant. I mean, this is based on science. So the more languages we are able to speak, at least we can speak one foreign language in addition to our own, we will see the world differently. And then we are in a better position to understand where the other people are coming from. And hopefully we can find a way to resolve our differences and disputes. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Professor Zhao Wei, you have the last word. You are the scientist. Maybe science is more important than ever. How about the joint mission to the Mars by China and the US?
That's certainly be a great idea. I hope Mars will be more peaceful than Earth. Who should be blamed for the current situation? Yes, we blame politicians here and there. I would say we should blame professors. We should blame professors of international studies and history. Fundamentally, the issue is education. Politicians educated by all of us. We didn't teach them well, that's why they mess up. I think it's very important, more than ever. We need to promote international studies and history. Honestly, because we're promoting science engineering, okay, globally, because that have tremendous economic benefits, which we all enjoy. And this part of education may be ignored or put the lower priority for too long. Therefore, people at large, politicians in particular, did not have a good perspective on international studies and history. And that's why we mess up. So I think we need to promote education on history and international studies fundamentally to address this issue. That's one. Now, particularly, COVID-19 at least has had one benefit. That means online courses, online meetings now become more accessible. This gives the opportunity that from both parts, we can start a core education. For example, certainly a lot of students actually today, I think some American students, they enrolled in Chinese universities. Now they cannot come back to China. They are taking courses online, vice versa. Many students from U.S. universities, now they stuck in China, they're taking online courses. However, just have online lecture is only part of a course. You also need the local engagement, right? You need to do the labs, you need to supervising, you need the tutorial, et cetera, et cetera. We should promote the university, just does not need the government approval. This has no government regulation to control or manage. We should ask universities to do more of these kind of things, co-educating through online means. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Zhao, for making very good concrete proposals. Now I'd like to again turn it over to Dr. Liu Yawei, and he would have the concluding remarks. Yawei.
Thanks. I want to thank the sponsors of this event. So it's China Research Center here in Atlanta, the National Association of Chinese Americans, which is also based here in Atlanta, and also United States Heartland China Association, which is a new local organization chaired by the former governor of Missouri State. And finally, is the Charming Friends Dialogue, which is a youth organization started by Chinese students who are studying overseas. I also want to report a total of 370 people have registered for this webinar. And at the peak, only the panelists were able to see we have 180 that are listening to our esteemed panelists. So it's a very good conversation. One thing I do want to echo what Jamie said is, it seems that in China, Chinese leaders and researchers like to say China is the victim of the current decline, that U.S. is all responsible for where this relationship is. I think that may be misleading. And China will have to match the rhetoric with actions. One example that Jamie mentioned is to welcome more Western and particularly American NGOs to go to China. Of course, after China's door is open again after COVID, by making changes to the law that is making it so miserable and so hard for U.S. NGOs and think tanks to operate in China. Finally, there's one question from the audience, which is asking, is U.S.-China competition good for China and the U.S. and for the world? I guess our panelists all have answers to that question. I would like everyone to bear that question in mind. I think the competition, if it's with sportsmanship, just like excellent athletes compete, in the upcoming Summer Olympics and the Winter Olympics in China, then that's good competition. But zero-sum competition, the competition designed to undermine the other athletes, to cut them down so that you can run faster and jump higher, that's the wrong competition. That's the competition, it seems, where this U.S.-China competition is heading. And that's unhealthy, that's unproductive, that's disastrous. We should at least try to make the difference to saying, we welcome competition, but please, you talk of the rules of the game and the competition will have to fall into that. So once again, I want to thank everyone in the audience, and I also want to show my deep felt appreciation, gratitude to our speakers. And so good evening to everyone here in the US.
Good evening.
Good noon to those that are on the other side of the Pacific. Pacific is big, but we hope with our effort, the ocean of difference is going to shrink so that we can meet both intellectually, but most importantly, physically, toward the end of this year. Thank you all.
Thank you. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Chinese，你那边录了吗？